What do you see when you look at this house? Do you just see another house, or do you notice all the work that went into getting this one building to stand in front of you? Do you know what really goes on behind the scenes, and do you know that every last detail of this home was expertly crafted not only to look nice, but to function as well? Do you know what types of windows are used? Are they gas-filled for insulation? Are they double-paned? What about the materials? Are they locally sourced? Or are they imported? And how does that affect the cost of the house? And how did this house affect the surrounding area? Did you think about this house's construction to the nearby environment? And did you think of how it affected wildlife? Up until this Masterworks, I didn't know how many types of windows there are or how much the orientation of the house matters, and I couldn't even read a site plan. Hello, my name is Ben Saruk, and this is my Masterworks, Designing Our World, a look into what architecture really entails. In this Masterworks, I will walk you through just about every aspect of architecture that I covered in my paper, and then I will finally show off the home that I personally digitally designed. In this presentation, we will cover what architecture is, what it entails, and a walkthrough of aspects, definition, and the meaning of architecture, my personal experience in architecture, meaning what was my inspiration, and my general experience around architecture, and what this Masterworks was meant to accomplish. Planning and documents are quite complex, but I will do my best to show you all types of architectural sketches and talk about what paperwork needs to be filled out. Modeling will cover the advantages and disadvantages of both digital models and physical miniature models. And after discussing modeling, we will discuss my final project, which is a completely original digital model designed by only me. And finally, we will take a look at that. Architecture is defined as the art and technique of designing and building as distinguished from the skills associated with construction. But architecture is much more than just a textbook definition. It is a great way to not only express oneself, but to leave your mark on the world as well. Look at these two buildings. Both are drastically different, but each is amazingly interesting to look at, and each took a team of architects years to design. This building on the left is called the Dancing House. It has a fantastic design and was created by Vlado Mulik and Frank Gehry. It took 4 years to build. And the right picture is a render of what the Line is supposed to look like. The Line is a massive construction project taking place in Saudi Arabia, and is supposed to be a fully functioning green city, and was originally designed to be over 160 kilometers long. And both are excellent examples of leaving a personal touch on your designs. Now let's look at a few aspects of architecture. Let's talk about practicality. The picture above is a good example of practicality. The fully slanted roof allows rain and snow to fall right off and prevents potential water damage and strain from the weight of snow. Practicality in building goes way beyond simply slanted roofs. When a building you're designing has an odd site, it's important to take notice of all the problems that other houses may not have and make the building process as practical as possible. A great example of another aspect is problem solving. A great example of hidden problem solving is in skyscrapers. Because skyscrapers are significantly taller than your average building, architects need to take into account strong winds that hit the building. To combat the strong winds, skyscrapers are not only made to stay straight, but instead made to bend with the wind. Some even install a counterweight to balance the effects of strong winds. Two aspects that are starting to be considered much more are making homes eco-friendly and sustainable. I will talk about these two together because they are closely related and have a lot in common. I will also not go into too much detail because I think most of you know how to help the environment. But if you have any questions, please ask them at the end. It is becoming more and more common to see large and small buildings alike take aspects of the environment and incorporate them into the building. When you take the environment into consideration and how to do minimum damage or at least reduce the negative impact your house has on the environment, there are many benefits. Now, we discussed what architecture is. We all have a better understanding and a very basic and broad idea of architecture. Next, I would like to talk to you more about my personal experience. Anybody who knows me knows I love Legos, and I've loved Legos for years. And this interest in Legos stemmed from a desire to create something, anything. This love of building was something that I needed to incorporate into my Masterworks. Eventually, after a few failed ideas, I decided that I would design my own home through a digital modeling software called SketchUp. This whole idea came from my top inspiration, Don Gurney. He is also my uncle, and he is the main reason I am interested in architecture to begin with. He's an experienced and excellent architect who designed his own home on Bowen Island and started Open Space Architecture, his own design firm. The home he designed is called the remainder house. This house is a huge inspiration and helped me structure the rest of this Masterworks. I was lucky enough to get a tour, and we sat down to discuss the process of designing the remainder home. While we talked, he showed me all the site plans, initial sketches, renovation drawings, and measurement papers of the home, all of which are sitting right there. I will show you that in a little bit, however. Having that opportunity to sit down with a professional and learn more about the planning aspect of architecture was fascinating. After my tour of his house, we went to visit his architectural firm, the next big inspiration. This is the remainder house, and this is us touring. The tour of this house was amazing. When we got a real breakdown of the architect's process and what went into this house. For example, let's look at the name. It's called the remainder house because the house is situated on the last remaining lot of that area. This lot has been untouched because it was on a hill, making building a house difficult, as you can see in this topographical map. All downhill, and this is the site. It was built on a pretty steep hill, which posed an issue, and it would take a decent amount of work to landscape and carve it out. The house is built on also what is probably the worst part of the whole lot. This is done in order to preserve the beauty of the scenery. It is a pretty simple idea. If you build on the ugly part of a lot, then the rest is only the best of what the lot has to offer. Speaking of preserving scenery, that leads me to the next big takeaway from this tour, the values. The main thing that Mr. Gurney strived to do in this house was to make nature feel as if it was more than just on the outside. Living with nature is how he described it, and this is done in a multitude of ways. Having large floor-to-ceiling windows helps the room feel bigger and helps to include the surrounding environment, and including a water feature incorporates a little subtle movement that helps the house feel alive and blended with nature. And just about every house that Mr. Gurney has designed is made to seamlessly blend the interior with the nature on the exterior. And these values are also carried onto open space architecture. This is open space architecture. Here, we further discussed the remainder house, and I got to see more planning documents and more model houses. All of the houses designed by Open Space have a very modern and sleek look, a look that I personally prefer over most other type of home designs. And all these houses were designed by Open Space architecture. As you can see, they are all made to incorporate some of the values we just talked about. Large windows for blending the outside with the inside, making it not feel too cramped. And they are all positioned to give the best view possible. And a lot of these, it may not be shown, but a lot of these have a water feature as well. Now, with my personal experience done, let's talk about the documents. When I say documents, I first want to talk about the sketches and drawings that an architect provides in the schematic design step of building a house. The schematic design process is when the architect provides a rough sketch for the client that explores the size, layout, and spacing of the house on the property. The main goal of the sketch is to understand what the client wants and establish the direction of the project will take, as well as to recognize the potential constraints early on in this project. Schematic design typically includes site plans, floor plans, and even sometimes a basic 3D model. The process of schematic design can be broken into two main steps: programming strategy and sketching. Programming strategy is when the architect meets with the clients and they discuss the requirements of the building. Sketching includes the architect coming up with a rough draft of what the house could look like based on what the client is looking for. There are usually a few different types of drawings presented in this stage. Like I said before, a site plan, floor plans, but also building elevations and building systems. Site plans depict where the proposed construction project will be situated and how it will be oriented and the distance from objects around the property. It will also include the required improvements like landscaping, roads, trails, and if any trees or boulders need to be moved. These are floor plans, and they are drawn from a bird's eye view to show the layout of each room and floor. They contain dimensions of the room and may include basic furniture and equipment like lighting. These floor plans are from the remainder house, and I have all of them right here. This is the floor plan for the remainder house, as well as this. The building elevations. Drawing for building elevations is from a head-on perspective. It is common to draw all sides of the building and label them as north, east, south, and west elevations. And some interior elevations are included as well, like a corridor wall or the front of an auditorium. These, again, are from the remainder house, and I have all of them within the construction documents, right there. And the next type is construction documents. They are documents that need to be assembled, and of course they're called construction documents because they are a necessary step to get the house built. But because my personal design won't leave the computer, getting a hold of these documents for my house isn't at all necessary. I will be covering a bit about what they do because it's still a big part of architecture and house building. To sum up construction documents, they're a collection of documents stating the work that needs to be done and shared amongst the architects and contractors for a specific project. The main contents of construction documents are drawings and specifications. The drawings are supplied by the architect and are often called EMP documents, to stand for mechanical, engineering, and plumbing. And the schematics are highly detailed and contain information such as all the measurements and the type of quantity and quality of the materials. And the construction documents for the remainder house are these, and all of these other designs here. So it's quite a lot to get into one house. Documents are done. Easy. Now let's talk more about modeling. Digital versus physical modeling, which is better? First, let's talk about the tools of digital design. There are a lot of different ways to design houses using computers. The most used software is SketchUp, D5 Render, and ArchiCAD. All of these have their own pros and cons. I use SketchUp because it is very common digital design software and is much easier to use than the others. And I already had access to SketchUp through the school computers. Professional architects also often use a sketchpad and a tablet to design because it's natural and easy to get used to. I do not own a tablet to design, so I did all of my designing on the computer. Other ways to create a digital home include Photoshop and virtual 3D modeling. Using Photoshop is common because it's very helpful in making perspective shots of the land or the house. Now, what about the challenges of digital design? One of the obvious design flaws in creating a house plans on a computer is that they are all on the computer. If you forget to save your work or it gets deleted, it is near impossible to get the work back. This can be helped by saving your work to the cloud, but there is still a risk. Because a lot of work that used to be done in person can now be done digitally, making it more convenient, some parts of the design process can become isolated, and the relationship between architect and client isn't as personal as it could be. This could mean there could be issues in communication, and you could end up feeling like less of the home design process than you should. A smaller problem, but one that should not be overlooked, is how simple designing digitally can look and be. It is not super difficult to create a house in SketchUp that looks finished to the average eye, despite not being. And with SketchUp, it is possible to look more qualified than you are as an architect. Often, they will do background checks, so you won't be able to be hired if you're a bad architect, but it's still a possibility. On the other side, we have advantages of digital design. Digital design has created many ways for the process to be easier and quicker for architects. With the introduction of tools like CAD, computer-aided design, architects have been able to make models that are extraordinarily detailed and realistic. And this allows for the client and architect to better understand the physical layout of the house and allows for quick and efficient editing. Speaking of editing, having a house be designed digitally allows the architect to make drastic changes with ease, as opposed to having to make a whole new model for each change. On a computer, models can be saved and back to ensure that they will not be lost, and so that an earlier version is always accessible. Having a house as a digital model also allows for a more collaborative process among architect, engineer, and contractor, and anyone else involved in the process. Having a shared and accessible model allows for explaining the house to be more fluent and lets other members of the group envision one another's ideas. With digital design done, let's move on to the next point, physical designing. This means physical models made of physical houses made of wood and sometimes 3D printed. The purpose of a physical model is the exact same as a digital model. Having a physical representation of the house allows for better visualization of the project, and having it in a 3D mini property allows for the client and architect to see how the project could fit in with the surrounding area. By having a model in scale with the property, it allows for better scale perception, meaning it can bring attention to scale perception issues that can arise with digital models, like having objects appear smaller due to screen size, zoom issues on a computer, and clanky keys, or bad computers overall. Having a model to show clients and to be a display in offices serves as a marketing tool and can help sell the house. Simply said, having a physical model is more aesthetically pleasing than having a model on the computer. However, having a physical model presents itself with some issues that are easily avoidable with a digital model. Transportation is remarkably easy when the house is on a computer, but transporting a fragile structure doesn't leave much margin for error. These models are often built from wood, and this makes them pretty fragile. Having a house model be susceptible to breaking from a fall or a light nudge is not ideal. Luckily, with digital design, there's no worry of the model breaking. If you want the model to be built from a stronger material, that could cost you more, and that is even more of a downside when you take into account that digital models are essentially free to make for the architect. Having the physical model be accessible by everyone involved in the project is also hard, because the client and architect could be in complete different places, and this could cause a misunderstanding of what the house should look like. Overall, physical models have an aesthetic appeal, but they're just not as practical as a digital model. Now, we have covered the aspects of architecture, my experience, planning, and sketches and modeling. Now let's see what I did with this information. From the beginning of Masterworks, I knew that I wanted to make something that could show how much I learned. Making something that would allow me to put my knowledge into practice, and it would help with making this presentation more engaging. I decided from the beginning that I wanted my model home to be in SketchUp. Originally, I wanted my SketchUp model to be the focus of this project, and I was planning on only covering the process of making digital and physical models. As the project went on, I found my interest veering away from digital models and more towards the initial planning in 2D sketches, like site plans, sketches, and measurement documents. I was already pretty devoted to SketchUp, however, and it was too late in the year to restart my Masterworks. When my house in SketchUp was nearing completion, I decided it would be great if I could somehow focus on the sketching part of architecture more. And we were able to set up a meeting with my external advisor in which he would give me, my dad, and Adrian a tour and breakdown of how he designed his own home on Bowen, the remainder house, as I mentioned before. After our tour of the remainder home, I went into Mr. Gurney's architecture firm, and I was able to have a tour of the building, and we sat down to discuss the process and designing of the remainder house. While we talked, he showed me all the site plans, initial sketches, renovation drawings, and measurement papers of the home. And having an opportunity to sit down with a professional architect and learn more about the planning aspect of architecture was extremely rewarding and allowed me to structure my presentation in such a way that I can have examples of all the paperwork I talk about. Now, as we near the end, let's talk about the build-up to my final model. Learning SketchUp was much harder and slower than I first envisioned. We started playing with SketchUp when we had our first Masterworks meeting, but it was more of an introduction to the program than it was to design an actual house. The first house designs were on the 25th of October. As you can clearly see in this photo, my skills in SketchUp were not too great, and it was looking nothing like a house. The first few SketchUp sessions were basically learning what the tools did, but that took way longer than it was supposed to, and by the time I had figured out the basics, it was November, and I was already behind. My skill in SketchUp did slowly get better, however. In my next 2 sessions, I had learned how to make stairs. This may seem pretty easy and small, but it was a huge leap from what I had been doing earlier. And this was when my project at least started to resemble a house and not an ugly box. Even though I had not measured correctly and the stairs were all different sizes and this was huge, I had seen my first glimmer of hope. One tool in SketchUp that helped endlessly was the pre-built models. The pre-built models included objects that would have been a pain to hand model, such as doors, windows, chairs, and a lot of interior furniture. This tool saved me hours because without it, I would have spent hours or days trying to get a door that would look like a long, ugly box. This tool was also a lifesaver when it came to designing the interior of my house. Now, it was January. I had my first house. The house was fully modeled and had real thought put into the design. I added a slanted roof, obviously to avoid water buildup and snow. I had a large window in the front of the home for not only aesthetic appeal, but also to let in plenty of natural light. But because this was still a prototype and not the real deal, there are still plenty of issues with the house. First off, the roof that I had been so proud of was engineered completely incorrectly, and it was constructed poorly, to say the least. I had not connected some points, so the faces of all of them were not connected, and there was a huge hole in the back. The house was also way too small and way too simple. While it looks like a house on the outside, the inside is as bland as it can be, and none of this took any real skill. I'll admit, it took much longer than it should have, and it wasn't particularly well designed or pretty. And this is when I started to really stress out about making the final project. I knew I could make a better looking house and have it be worthy of a Masterworks. But this was my first house that looked like the house, and there were still many issues that I just covered. In March, I took a pretty big break from SketchUp to work on my paper. But when I came back, I'd forgotten how to do lots of SketchUp, so I went back to watching tutorials to see if there was any tricks or tools I'd missed. Luckily, this was a great idea because it allowed me to discover tools I'd not been using, like rotating models and on a different axis and splitting up planes to a different length. Luckily, my skill through SketchUp did improve throughout the year, and although I am still quite a ways away from getting to a professional level of skill, I see that this is a big step in the right direction. And finally, in April, I had my final house design. My final house design took into consideration all of what I had been researching and talking about. My house went for a modern look with the sharp square angles and a wide window that allowed sunlight into the bedroom in the morning. The color palette is gray with a light wood, white concrete, stone bricks as an accent and to keep stability throughout the building. And some details that I am proud of are the garage, trees, and gutters. I hadn't really talked about the garage much because they are often not necessary and a driveway would work fine, but I prefer the look of a garage. Having a garage also helped use up space in the house that probably would have gone to waste. The trees and bushes are a detail that I think makes a huge difference in the final look and feel. I was also able to implement gutters in my design right here, which may not sound like anything, but it was a tedious process that included removing the whole roof of my house on accident. And now I'm almost out of time, but I would like to show you a few of the rooms in my house. First up, right here, we have the bedroom. This room I'm pretty proud of. I think it looks pretty great, and for my dream house, this is exactly what I would want my bedroom to look like. Large windows for sunlight and plant life, and the color aesthetic is great. And then there's also the entrance room, which is kind of poor looking, but there doesn't need to be much in an entrance. And finally, we have the dining room. This is a stretched out picture for some reason, but this is a person for scale to see how everything would fit together. In conclusion, everything that I learned through this Masterworks is valuable information and can help me if I ever choose to pursue architecture or design. I now know the basics of working in SketchUp and the work that goes into making a digital model house. The most impactful part of this Masterworks, however, was to see architects and when they worked. To research and write about models, site plans, and the preparation that must be made before constructing a house, and then being able to look at the real site plans of the real house that was built from those plans was a real highlight of this. And this project has been everything I wanted. It taught me about a subject I am genuinely interested in, and I learned how to create on SketchUp, and I was able to talk to a real professional and get to learn more about architecture than I ever thought I would know. As for my thank yous, I would like to thank Don Gurney, also my uncle, the biggest inspiration in this project, and without you, none of this would have been possible, and I would never have found architecture as interesting as I do. Adrian Van Lith de Yoda, yes, you were also a huge inspiration and helped me get through this whole project by reviewing my paper and looking over my slides. My parents, thank you for letting me rehearse with you and giving me constructive feedback on my house. And to my friends, you guys didn't do much, but I'd like to shout out. And thank you to all of you for listening. Ben.
Well done, Mr. Saruk. That was an amazing representation of what I saw in your paper, so well done for that. But we are now going to quiz you a little bit with some questions from your advisors first, so Don or Adrian.
Mr. Saruk, it was really, really interesting working with you. I don't think, though, your presentation gave a clear picture of the amount of hours of frustration that you had using SketchUp. That's a very difficult program. It seems simple, and yet it is not. And I was really, really impressed by your final design and how you were able to pull that together. Well done.
Thank you.
But where I saw your eyes really light up, and when I was working with you, the excitement really came when you were talking about getting to work with Don and your experience working with Don, seeing his house, seeing his architecture firm, and going through all these really interesting and detailed documents. I just wonder if you could elaborate why you found this so powerful. What was it about that experience that made that light shine in your eyes?
Okay, so I'll go back to touring the house was probably, the architectural firm, was probably my favorite part, because something I did not talk about was every little thing that I saw, like stuff I did not expect to see. For example, here we have, this just may look like a bunch of junk on the table, but for each project that open space architecture does, they set apart a bunch of materials and like the wood, the railing types that they think would look good in the house to have a little representation of like the colors and the materials used for the house. I found that super interesting. And also, I didn't know this, but open space architecture also designs a lot of, what's it called? Furniture for their houses, and that's something that not a lot of architectural firms do. As well as in these documents, I'm not going to pull it up because it would take a while, but they design different types of hinges for their houses, which is something, again, not a lot of architectural firms do. Like for the remainder home, especially, we walked through the different types of hinges and connections throughout the house, and that I found super fascinating. And it was just the little things that I didn't expect to see that really jumped out at me.
Thank you.
Don,
Don?
would you like to?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I think as a young architect, designer, if you are commissioned to do a project in, say for example, one of the beautiful lots on Bowen Island, and you're out there walking the site, what are you looking for on that site that will inform your design, and why?
I think definitely, and this answer definitely comes because I worked with open space architecture, but to look at the surrounding nature and the views is something I'd have to take into consideration to get the best possible look of the house, and to have really that value that open space carries, to have nature blend seamlessly with the house, to have them not feel separate but together. I'd really look at the surrounding area, where I could put the house to have everything feel incorporated. And of course, I'd look at even the sun, for example. I would have overhangs to prevent in the summer when the sun's higher. I don't want that shining in through, but in the winter, it's great to have the sun shining right into like the dining room or whatnot.
Can I add on to that? When we were getting our house designed, our architect used SketchUp to show us the view from every window. So he had put all the major trees that were around so you could see everything out of the window, which was pretty cool. And I'm not sure if SketchUp could do that for you, but I bet you it could.
Oh, it could.
There's a lot of hidden gems in it.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions from the floor? Go ahead, Kate. Come on.
I wanted to ask if 3D printing is used for modeling.
I believe it is. I think wood is more common, but 3D printing, it's definitely easier now. And yes, I believe that overall it's used fairly often to print the little model houses and whatnot.
Questions, students? Let's hear some good ones. Anyone? Go ahead, Storm.
What device did you use SketchUp on?
I used SketchUp on my school computer, which was a very big mistake because it was super janky, and often it wouldn't let me open up my own model. So if any of you want to design a house, do it on like your home computer, because SketchUp for schools is much jankier than it should be. And it would have been a better process if I had just done it on like my dad's computer. Yeah.
Go on up,
Good job, Mr. Saruk. In the future, if you were to have a house, do you see yourself designing yourself or like getting open architecture?
I think I'd like my uncle to design my house, because I don't know, all the open space architecture houses, I really like the look of all of them, and I don't think my design skills aren't that good, but yeah, definitely I'd get open space architecture, because I really love the look of those houses.
John, would you hire him for an apprenticeship?
Absolutely.
All right, great. Come on up, Sam.
Mr. Saruk, and my question for you is, do you have any regrets?
I think that's a good question. I think definitely I would have liked to do more site planning and everything for my own house, because like I said before, that's a really fascinating part of the process, and being able to show off site plans, floor plans, and building elevations for my own home would be super cool. And I think just overall, if I put in a little more work into less just designing it on the computer, but also the what's it called? All the documents and everything for this house. That's something I would have done. I would have loved to do that.
Mr. Saruk, great presentation. So I have two questions for you. One, if you had like an extra year to do this, what do you think? What else would you do? And second, if you were to be an architect, where in the world would you want to pursue that?
Ooh. Okay, for the first one, if I had an extra year, I would have put much more work into trying to tour other architect firms, because I would have liked to get other points of view, and I would have liked to interview more architects. I would have liked to get, some more a variety with what I'm talking about, and put more work into designing a house. Maybe have a few more practice models. As for where I would want to do it, I think on Bowen, or at least around Bowen, because it's truly beautiful here, and being able to like these views and the nature, everything, it's just great, amazing inspiration. Plus, I'd like to live here.
Connor.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Saruk. I have a question. For hundreds of years, the pencil has played a large role in architects' offices and their work. And a lot of your presentation focuses on these software programs. I'm wondering if you think that pencils have disappeared from architects' offices, or whether they still have a role. And related to that, whether on the other way around, is the software doing some of our designing or not doing?
I think having hand-drawn, like, just original sketches will probably always be the case, because it's just a great way to put your ideas immediately onto paper and get everything out. Definitely, like, taking place of physical modeling, like I said, is digital modeling, but I think as far as putting a pen to paper goes, it'll probably still be around for quite a while, because I know that's a part of the process that a lot of architects also really enjoy to do. And the second part was, what part of digital design is taking over what we can't do?
I'm wondering, I guess I'm going to rephrase that, how much is the software taking control of the design process?
I think it's such a huge part of the design process that it's definitely a huge part, and it plays a big role, but I think it still has some limitations that it can't do everything, and having physical models and everything is still like aesthetically pleasing. It's great to have display in the office. So I don't think it's taking away from any specific part of, it's taking away from parts of the design process, but I don't think it's taking over too much or doing what we can.
Julie?
Great presentation, Mr. Saruk. I was wondering, what was your favorite part while doing your master's?
All the paperwork. It may sound boring, but I really, really liked the paperwork. I really liked seeing all of that. And having, for the remainder house, I have a huge carton of the original sketches, the original floor plans and everything. And looking through that was amazing, because you got to see all the ideas come out as you were designing the house.
Great presentation, Mr. Saruk. What was the hardest thing, do you think, designing your house on SketchUp?
I think just having it on the school computer, because it was really, the Wi-Fi wouldn't work sometimes. It would have been so much smoother had I a better computer. But yeah, it was just, for some reason, SketchUp on schools is pretty janky, and the Chromebooks we have are kind of old. So it was just, the tools I used were not ideal.
Thank you, Mr. Saruk. It was really interesting to see your whole journey. Thanks for sharing that with us. I was very fortunate to build a house in Tokyo, and we worked with an architect, but it took us 3 architects. We didn't land there until we found a third architect. And I think because all architects have a good set of skills, but what I'm looking for is someone who is expressing something I'm trying to but not able to. So Mr. Gurney likes to have his buildings connected to the environment, puts a water feature. What would you say are, or would you like to express in your own creations? Is there something you're trying to tell?
I don't think as an architect I've developed enough to really look at my own houses and be like, I really want this to say this to the buyer or the viewer, the client. But I think definitely if I pursue this, something of a calling card almost, that I can be like, yeah, you can tell it's designed by Ben Saruk because of this, or it incorporates this in its design and whatnot. But I think as of right now, I haven't developed or looked enough into that to really have a specific answer.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Liz.
Wonderful presentation, Mr. Saruk. I see here your house appears to be built in Manitoba, maybe? I was just wondering what you would have to take into consideration when building a house on a more uneven surface.
Definitely, well, like the slope, of course, with the remainder house. A lot of digging out had to be done. And you could also build supports to, if this was a hill, you know, level out, have maybe a wood, I don't know, like base extrude from the hill. And also take into, like, this is just flat. This doesn't have any detail of any sorts. But also, like, rocks and everything. Huge trees could be in the way. A lot of nature could be in the way. So you got to take into account everything that you got to get rid of if you have to dig out, all sorts of things.
Go ahead, Joe.
Wonderful presentation. In your own house, do you think you add any like eco-friendly, eco feature or something to your house, or happy?
I had a lot more on the eco-friendly part of architecture. I really wanted to do solar panels and something called radiant floor heating, which Jen knows all about because her house has it. Basically using hot water running underneath your floorboards to heat the house. That's pretty eco-friendly. And also having just simple things like Energy Star appliances, which are just really energy efficient appliances, have it throughout the house. I think it's just the little things I would do to make my house just a little more eco-friendly. Nothing huge though.
Mr. Saruk, almost senior.
Excellent presentation, Mr. Saruk. I was wondering if throughout your learning process there was anything you didn't realize that architects had to take into account that you learned about.
I had an okay understanding of what the architect does and everything. Oh, actually, while I was talking with my uncle, he was mentioning about the moon and how in some of his houses they'll take into account where the moon is to get a nice view into the house. And that was super weird because I was like, what? I knew you take into it. I know that a lot of architects, all of them take into account where the sun will be, but having the moon be a part of the design process was super cool and something I did not expect at all.
Go ahead, Caleb.
I wanted to know how much design for earthquakes you need to account for in your process.
I totally forgot that was a thing, so I didn't actually do any, but that's a great point. I totally should have done that, especially if I was planning to put it somewhere on Bowen. Yeah. Okay, I should have done that. Yeah, Pam would help me.
I have a question for you, and I have a question for all of you. So you had a photo there of you playing with Lego. Lots of you have played with Lego. Then it kind of morphs into Minecraft a little bit. I know that's for you. When you first started this, you were talking more about making models in the very beginning of this process. And I'm wondering if the frustrations of doing it on a computer program outweigh the satisfaction that you might have got from creating with your hands.
I think it's a learning curve, because with like Lego, it's something I see it and I build it like that, and instant satisfaction. With SketchUp, it's much of a longer process. The outcome is amazing. Like if I had a fully beautiful professional level designed house, absolutely worth it no matter how long it takes. But I think as of right now, this is my first designed house. I think I'd still prefer doing Lego and just having that instant little...
Well, and having something tangible.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a cool feature on SketchUp where you can go in and do 360 rotations, so it'd be awesome to see that house through that eye of looking at the windows and going in each room. Any other questions from the floor? Go ahead, Karen.
Excellent job, Mr. Saruk. I'm curious, it's one thing to design a house on SketchUp and have that sort of model, and it's an entirely other thing to build the house. So did you need any sort of knowledge of construction when designing your house so that your house would actually be like buildable?
I had, so I looked at my house and I was like, I'm never going to build this house. So having it be feasible wasn't my top priority. I tried to make it feasible and everything, but then I learned a lot about construction throughout my tours of like the remainder house and the architectural firm. So then coming back to my house, I'd look at it and I'd be like, oh, I could have made, this would be pretty hard to build. How would I get this in here? Or this would be super easy to build and everything. So near the ending of the project, I definitely learned quite a bit about the construction process, but I didn't, since I was building this house, while I was building it at least, wasn't looking at that specifically.
Go ahead, Ms. Bryant.
Amazing presentation, Mr. Saruk. My question is, do you think you'll pursue this?
I would love to pursue this. I really find design fascinating. I think even in high school, if I took like a design course of sketching and whatnot, I would absolutely love to pursue this. Getting a job in architecture is the dream, but as of right now, I think there's not much I can do. But as of right now, I definitely will take any step I can to further my knowledge.
I thought it was interesting that you noticed the hinges in your uncle's house, and I feel like you might be drawn towards design, either houses, but also design of anything. And all those design cycles that Adrian teaches you can be incorporated in many, many ways. And whether it's small scale intricacy or something much larger scale, I think you have an eye for it. I think it's exciting for you.
For one of my first ideas, I wanted to look at how robotic arms and limbs are made. And I was like, oh, that'd be pretty cool. But then I leaned to this. I really love design, just as a general.
Yeah, you can tell. Go ahead, Neil.
Thank you, Mr. Saruk. That was great. And I think maybe the nicest set of slides I've ever seen. Like the check marks, everything's such a great aesthetic. Looking at that, I can kind of get an idea about your house, but how would you describe your personal sort of design aesthetic?
I'd say so far, it's pretty heavily inspired or copied from a lot of things that I see on like the internet and everything while researching this house. Because then again, I have next to no experience in this so far. First house design, I don't have like my personal touch won't come out in this as much as if I do later houses. But definitely it's modern. I love the sharp angles. I love lighter colors on the exterior with the darker on the base. I think right now it's very, very similar to what you see online, but if I pursue this, then I'll for sure get a signature touch or whatnot.
And do you drive around looking at houses online, going, I like that, I don't like that? Or...
If I pass a house I like, I'll be like, oh, I like that. My mom likes to do that. She'll point out houses I like. So that's fun.